We ended on chapter 9. We ended on chapter 9. Let's see if I can find that. Maybe we ended on chapter 10. Okay, well, this is the picture for chapter 9. This is a good picture. Okay. Outside, the world had become a formless, swirling mist with no shapes or shadows behind it. While the house itself seemed to have twisted and stretched, it seemed to Coraline that it was crouching and staring down at her, as if it were not really a house, but only the idea of a house, and the person who had the idea, she was certain, was not a good person. There was sticky web stuff clinging to her arm, and she wiped it off as best she could. The gray windows of the house slanted at strange angles. The other mother was waiting for her, standing on the grass with her arms folded. Her black button eyes were expressionless, but her lips were pressed tightly together in a cold fury. When she saw Coraline, she reached out one long white hand and she crooked a finger. Coraline walked towards her. The other mother said nothing. I got two, said Coraline, one soul still to go. The expression on the other mother's face did not change. She might not have heard what Coraline said. Well, I thought you'd want to know, said Coraline. Thank you, Coraline, said the other mother coldly. And her voice did not come from her mouth, it came from the mist and the fog in the house and the sky. She said, You know I love you. And despite herself, Coraline nodded. It was true. The other mother loved her. But she loved Coraline as a miser loves money or a dragon loves its gold. In the other mother's button eyes, Coraline knew she was a possession, nothing more, a tolerated pet whose behavior was no longer amusing. I don't want your love, said Coraline. I don't want anything from you. Not even a helping hand? Asked the other mother. You have been doing so well, after all. I thought you might want a little hint to help with the rest of your treasure hunt. I'm doing fine on my own, said Coraline. Yes, said the other mother. But if you wanted to get into the flat in the front, the empty one, to look around, you would be able to find the door locked. And then where would you be? Oh, Coraline pondered this for a moment. Then she said, Is there a key? The other mother stood there in paper gray fog of the flattening world. Her hair drifted about her head as if it had a mind and purpose all its own. She coughed suddenly in the back of her throat and then opened her mouth. The other mother reached up her hand and removed a small brass key, front door key from her tongue. Here, she said, you'll need this to get in. She tossed the key casually towards Coraline, who caught it one-handed before she could think about whether she wanted it or not. The key was still slightly damp. A chill wind blew about them, and Coraline shivered and looked away. When she looked back, she was alone. Uncertainly, she walked around to the front of the house and stood in front of the door to the empty flat. Like all the doors, it was painted bright green. She does not mean you well, whispered the ghost voice in her ear. We do not believe that she would help you. It must be a trick. Coraline said, Yes, you're right, I expect. Then she put the key in the lock and turned it. Silently, the door swung open, and silently, Coraline walked inside. The flat had walls the color of old milk. The wooden boards of the floor were uncarpeted and dusty, with the marks and patterns of old carpet and rugs. There was no furniture in there, only places where the furniture had once been. Nothing decorated the walls. There were discolored rectangles on the walls to show where paintings or photographs had once hung. It was so silent that Coraline imagined that she could hear the motes of dust drifting through the air. She found herself to be quite worried that something would jump out at her, so she began to whistle. She thought it would make it harder for things to jump out at her if she was whistling. She first walked through the empty kitchen. Then she walked through an empty bathroom containing only a cast iron bath, and in the bath, a dead spider the size of a small cat. The last room she looked at had, she supposed, had once been a bedroom. She could imagine that the rectangular dust shadow on the floorboards had once been a bed. Then she saw something and smiled grimly. She set into the floorboards was a large metal ring. Coraline knelt and took the cold ring into her hands, and she tugged upwards as hard as she could. Terribly, slowly, stiffly, heavily, a hinged square of floor lifted. It was a trap door. It lifted, and through the opening, Coraline could see only darkness. She reached down, and her hand found a cold switch. She flicked it without much hope that it would work, but somewhere below her, a bulb lit. A thin yellow light came up from the hole in the floor. She could see steps heading down, but nothing else. Coraline put her hand on her pocket and took the stone with the hole in it. She looked through it at the cellar, but saw nothing. She put the stone back in her pocket. Up through the hole came the smell of damp clay and something else, an acrid tang like sour vinegar. Coraline let herself down the hole, looking nervously at the trapdoor. It was so heavy that if it fell, she was sure she'd be trapped down in the darkness forever. She put up a hand and touched it, but it stayed in position. And she turned towards the darkness below. She walked down the steps. Let's see, I think we already read this chapter. Stress. Yeah. Okay. Let me see how many people are in this room. Looks like nobody's in here with me. Let me double check. Appears I have one viewer, which is probably you, George, right? George. Oh. I don't know. I'm going to go to the next chapter. Coraline walked up. So we're going to chapter 10 because I think we already read 9. Coraline walked up the stairs outside the building to the topmost flat, where in her world the crazy old man upstairs lived. She had gone up there once with her real mother when her mother was collecting for charity. They had stood in the open doorway waiting for the crazy old man with the big mustache to find the envelope that Coraline's mother had left. And the flat smelled of strange foods and pipe tobacco and odd, sharp, cheesy smelling things Coraline could not name. She had not wanted to go farther inside than that. I'm an explorer, said Coraline out loud, but her words sounded muffled and dead on the misty air. She had made it out of the cellar, hadn't she? And she had, but if there was one thing that Coraline was certain of, it was that this flat would be worse. She reached the top of the house. The topmost flat had once been the attic of the house, but that was long ago. She knocked on the green painted door. It swung open and she walked in. And here's a really creepy picture. Let me see if I can get it for you. Let's see. Oh, how about that? Yeah. And then in italics it says, we have eyes, we have nervuses, we have tails, we have teeth. You'll all get what you deservices when we rise from underneath. Whispered a dozen or so tiny voices in the dark flat with the roof so low where it met with the walls that Coraline could almost reach up and touch it. Red eyes stared at her. Little pink feet scurried away as she came close. Darker shadows slipped through the shadows at the edge of things. It smelled much worse in here than in the real crazy old man upstairs flat. That smelled of food, unpleasant food to Coraline's mind, but she knew that was a matter of taste. She did not like spices, herbs, or exotic things. This place smelled as if all the exotic foods in the world had been left out to go rotten. Little girl, said a rustling voice in a far room. Yes, said Coraline. I'm not frightened, she told herself. And as she thought it, she knew it was true. There was nothing here that frightened her. These things, even the thing in the cellar, were illusions, things made by the other mother and a ghastly parody of the real people and real things on the other end of the corridor. She could not truly make anything, decided Coraline. She could only twist and copy and distort things that had already existed. And then Coraline found herself wondering why the other mother would have placed a snow globe on the drawing room mantelpiece. For the mantelpiece, for the mantelpiece in Coraline's world was quite bare. And as soon as she asked herself the question, she realized there was actually an answer. Then the voice came again, and her train of thought was interrupted. Come here, little girl. I know what you want, little girl. It was a rustling voice, scratchy and dry. It made Coraline think of some kind of enormous dead insect, which was silly, she knew. How could a dead thing, especially a dead insect, have a voice? She walked through several rooms with low, slanting ceilings until she came to the final room. It was a bedroom, and the other crazy old man upstairs sat at the far end of the room in the near darkness, bundled up in his coat and hat. As Coraline entered, he began to talk. Nothing's changed, little girl, he said, his voice sounding like the noise dry leaves make as they rustle across a pavement. And what if you do everything you swore you would? What then? Nothing's changed. You'll go home, you'll be bored, you'll be ignored. No one will listen to you, not really listen to you. You're too clever and too quiet for them to understand. They don't even get your name right. Stay here with us, said the voice from the figure at the end of the room. We will listen to you and play with you and laugh with you. Your other mother will build whole worlds for you to explore and tear them down every night when you're done. Every day you will be better and brighter than the one that went before. Remember the toy box? How much better would a world be built just like that, and all for you? And there will be gray, wet days where I just don't know what to do, and there's nothing to read or watch and nowhere to go. And the day drags on forever? Asked Coraline. From the shadows, the man said, Never. And will there be awful meals from food made with recipes with garlic and tarragon and broad beans in? Asked Coraline. Every meal will be a thing of joy, whispered the voice from under the old man's hat. Nothing will pass your lips that does not entirely delight you. And could I have day-glow green gloves to wear and yellow Wellington boots in the shape of frogs? Asked Coraline. Frogs, ducks, rhinos, octopuses, whatever you desire. The world will be built new for you every morning if you stay here. You can have whatever you want. Coraline sighed. You really don't understand, do you? She said. I don't want whatever I want. Nobody does. Not really. What kind of fun would it be if I just got everything I wanted, just like that? It didn't mean anything. What then? I don't understand, said the whispery voice. Of course you don't understand, she said, raising the stone with the hole in it to her eye. You're just a bad copy she made of the crazy old man upstairs. Let's let's use our stone with the hole in it. This is my stone with a hole in it. Not even that anymore, said the dead whispery voice. There was a glow coming from the raincoat of the man at about chest height. Through the hole in the stone, the glow twinkled and shone blue-white as any star. She wished she had a stick or something to poke him with. She had no wish to get any closer to the shadowy man at the end of the room. Coraline took a step closer to the man, and he fell apart. Black rats leapt from the sleeves and from under the coat and hat, a score or more of them, red eyes shining in the dark. They chittered and they fled. The coat fluttered and fell heavily to the floor. The hat rolled into one corner of the room. Coraline reached out one hand and pulled the coat open. It was empty, although it was greasy to the touch. There was no sign of the final glass marble in it. She scanned the room, squinting through the hole in the stone, and caught sight of something that twinkled and burned like a star at the floor level by the doorway. It was being carried in the forepaws of the largest black rat. As she looked, it slipped away. The other rats watched her from the corner of the room as she ran after it. Now, rats can run faster than people, especially over short distances. But a large black rat holding a marble, even in its front two paws, is no match for a determined girl, even if she is small for her age. Moving at a run, smaller black rats ran back and forth across her path, trying to distract her, but she ignored them all, keeping her eyes fixed on the one with the marble, who was heading straight out of the flat towards the front door. They reached the steps on the outside of the building. Coraline had time to observe that the house itself was continuing to change, becoming less distinct and flattening out even as she raced down the stairs. It reminded her of a photograph of a house now, not the thing itself. Then she was simply racing pell-mell down the steps in pursuit of the rat, with no room in her mind for anything else. Certain she was gaining on it, she was running fast, too fast, she discovered as she came to the bottom of one flight of stairs, and her foot skidded and twisted as she went crashing into the concrete landing. Her left knee was scraped and skinned, and the palm of one hand she had thrown out to stop herself was a mess of scraped skin and grit. It hurt a little, and it would, she knew, soon hurt much more. She picked the grit out of her palm and climbed to her feet, and as fast as she could, knowing that she had lost it was already too late. She went down to the final landing at ground level. She looked around for the rat, but it was gone, and the marble with it. Her hand stung where the skin had been scraped, and there was blood trickling down her ripped pajama leg from her knee. It was as bad as the summer that her mother had taken the training wheels off Coraline's bicycle. But then, back then, and with all the cuts and scraped, her knee had scabbed on top of scabs. She had a feeling of achievement. She was learning something, doing something she had not known how to do. Now she felt nothing but cold loss. She had failed the ghost children. She had failed her parents. She had failed herself, failed everything. She closed her eyes and wished that the earth would swallow her up. There was a cough. She opened her eyes and saw the rat. It was lying on the brick path at the bottom of the stairs with a surprised look on its face, which was now several inches away from the rest of it. Its whiskers were stiff. Its eyes were wide open, its teeth visible and yellow and sharp. A collar of wet blood glistened at its neck. Beside the decapitated rat, a smug expression on its face, was the black cat. It rested one paw on the gray glass marble. "I think I once mentioned," said the cat, "that I don't like rats at the best of times. It looked like you needed this one, however. I hope you don't mind me getting involved." "I think," said Coraline, trying to catch her breath, "I think you may have said something of the sort." The cat lifted its paw from the marble, which rolled towards Coraline. She picked it up. In her mind, a final voice whispered to her urgently, "She has lied to you. She will never give you up. Now she has you. She will no more give any of us up than change her nature." The hairs on the back of Coraline's neck prickled, and Coraline knew that the girl's voice told the truth. She put the marble in her dressing gown pocket with the others. She had all 3 marbles now. All she needed to do was find her parents. And Coraline realized with surprise that bit was easy. She knew exactly where her parents were. If she had stopped to think, she might have known where they were all along. The other mother could not create, she could only transform and twist and change. The mantelpiece in the dressing room back home was quite empty, but knowing that, she knew something else as well. The other mother, she plans to break her promise. She won't let us go, said Coraline. I wouldn't put it past her, admitted the cat. Like I said, there's no guarantee she'll play fair. And then he raised his head. Hello. Did you see that? What? Look behind you, said the cat. The house had flattened out even more. It no longer looked like a photograph, more like a drawing, a crude charcoal scribble of a house drawn on gray paper. Whatever's happening, said Coraline, thank you for helping with the rat. I suppose I'm almost there, aren't I? So you go off into the mist or wherever you go, and well, I get to see you at home. If she lets me go home. The cat's fur was on end. Its tail was bristling like a chimney sweep's brush. What's wrong? Asked Coraline. They've gone, said the cat. They aren't there anymore. The ways in and out of this place, they just went flat. Is that bad? The cat lowered its tail, swishing it from side to side angrily. It made a low growling noise in the back of its throat. It walked in a circle until it was facing away from Coraline, and then it began to walk backwards stiffly, one step at a time, until it was pushing up against Coraline's leg. She put down a hand to stroke it, and she could feel how hard its heart was beating. It was trembling like a dead leaf in a storm. You'll be fine, said Coraline. Everything's going to be fine. I'll take you home. The cat said nothing. Come on, cat, said Coraline. She took a step back towards the steps. But the cat stayed where it was, looking miserable and oddly much smaller. If the if the only way out of here is past her, said Coraline, then that's the way we're going to go. She went back to the cat, bent down and picked it up. The cat did not resist. It simply trembled. She supported its bottom with one hand, rested its front legs on her shoulders. The cat was heavy, but not too heavy to carry. It licked at the palm of her hand where the blood from the scrape was welling up. Coraline walked up the stairs one step at a time, heading back to her own flat. She was aware of the marbles clicking in her pocket, aware of the stone with a hole in it, aware of the cat pressing against her. She got to the front door, now just with a small child's scrawl of a door, and she pushed her hand against it, half expecting that her hand would rip through it, revealing nothing behind it but blackness and a scattering of stars. But the door swung open, and Coraline went through. Once inside her flat, or rather the flat that was not hers, Coraline was pleased to see that it had not transformed into the empty drawing that the rest of the house seemed to have become. It had depth and shadows, and someone who stood in the shadows waiting for Coraline to return. And so you're back, said the other mother. She did not sound pleased. And you brought vermin with you. No, said Coraline, I brought a friend. She could feel the cat stiffening under her hands, as if it were anxious to be away. Coraline wanted to hold on to it like a teddy bear for reassurance, but she knew that cats hated to be squeezed, and she suspected that frightened cats were liable to bite and scratch if provoked in any way, even if they were on your side. You know I love you, said the other mother flatly. You have a very funny way of showing it, said Coraline. She walked down the hallway and then turned into the drawing room, steady step by steady step, pretending that she could not feel the other mother's blank black eyes on her back. Her grandmother's formal furniture was still in there, and the painting on the wall of the strange fruit, but now the fruit in the painting had been eaten, and all that remained in the bowl was the browning core of an apple, several plum and peach stones, and the stem of what had formerly been a bunch of grapes. The lion pawed table raked the carpet with its clawed wooden feet, as if it were impatient for something. At the end of the room in the corner stood the wooden door, which had once in another place opened onto a plain brick wall. Coraline tried not to stare at it. The window showed nothing but mist. This was it, Coraline knew, the moment of truth, the unraveling time. The other mother had followed her in. Now she stood in the center of the room, between Coraline and the mantelpiece, and looked down at Coraline with black button eyes. It was funny, Coraline thought. The other mother did not look anything at all like her own mother. She wondered how she had ever been deceived into imagining the resemblance. The other mother was huge. Her head was almost brushing the ceiling and very pale, the color of a spider's belly. Her hair writhed and twined about her head. Her teeth were sharp as knives. Well, said the other mother sharply, where are they? Coraline leaned against an armchair, adjusted the cat with her left hand, and put her right hand into her pocket, and pulled out the 3 glass marbles. They were a frosted gray, and they clinked together in the palm of her hand. The other mother reached her white fingers for them, but Coraline slipped them back into her pocket. She knew it was true then. The other mother had no intention of letting her go or keeping her word. It had been an entertainment and nothing more. Hold on, she said. We aren't finished yet, are we? The other mother looked daggers, but she smiled sweetly. No, she said, I suppose not. After all, you still need to find your parents, don't you? Yes, said Coraline. I must not look at the mantelpiece, she thought. I must not even think about it. Well, said the other mother, produce them. Would you like to look at the cellar again? I have some other interesting things hidden down there, you know. No, said Coraline. I know where my parents are. The cat was heavy in her arms. She moved it forward, unhooking its claws from her shoulder as she did so. Where? It stands to reason, said Coraline. I've looked everywhere you'd hide them. They aren't in this house. The other mother stood very still, giving nothing away. Lips tightly closed, she might have been a wax statue. Even her hair had stopped moving. So, Coraline continued, both hands wrapped firmly around the black cat. I know where they have to be. You've hidden them in the passageway between the houses, haven't you? They're behind that door. She nodded her head towards the door in the corner. The other mother remained statue still, but a hint of the smile crept back on her face. Oh, they are they? Why don't you open it? Said Coraline. They'll be there all right. It was her only way home, she knew, but it all depended on the other mother's needing to gloat, needing not only to win, but to show that she had won. The other mother reached her hand slowly into her apron pocket and produced the black iron key. The cat stirred uncomfortably in Coraline's arms as if it wanted to get down. Just stay there for a few moments longer, she thought, wondering if it could hear her. I'll get us both home, I said. I promise. She felt the cat relax ever so slightly in her arms. The other mother walked over to the door and pushed the key into the lock. She turned the key. Coraline heard the mechanism clunk heavily. She was already starting as quietly as she could, step by step, to back away towards the mantelpiece. The other mother pushed down on the door handle and pulled open the door, revealing a corridor behind it, dark and empty. There, she said, waving her hands at the corridor. The expression of delight on her face was a very bad thing to see. You're wrong. You don't know where your parents are, do you? They aren't there. She turned and looked at Coraline. Now, she said, you're going to stay here forever and always. No, said Coraline, I'm not. And as hard as she could, she threw the black cat towards the other mother. It yowled and landed on the other mother's head, claws flailing, teeth bared, fierce and angry. Fur on end, it looked half again as big as it was in real life. Without waiting to see what would happen, Coraline reached up to the mantelpiece and closed her hand around the snow globe, pushing it deep into her pocket. The cat made a deep, undulating yowl and sank its teeth into the other mother's cheek. She was flailing at it. Blood ran from the cuts on her white face. Not red blood, but a deep, tarry black stuff. Coraline ran for the door. Here's oh, that picture. She pulled the key out of the lock. Leave her. Come on, she shouted to the cat. It hissed and swiped its scalpel-sharp claws at the other mother's face in one wild rake, which left black ooze trickling from several gashes on the other mother's nose. Then it sprang down towards Coraline. Quickly, she said. The cat ran towards her, and they both stepped quickly. They both stepped into the dark corridor. It was colder in the corridor, like stepping down into a cellar on a warm day. The cat hesitated for a moment. Then, seeing the other mother was coming towards them, it ran to Coraline and stopped by her legs. Coraline began to pull the door closed. It was heavier than she imagined a door would be, and pulling it closed was like trying to close a door against a high wind. And then she felt something from the other side starting to pull against her. Shut, she thought, and then she said out loud, "Come on, please." And she felt the door begin to move, to pull closed, to give suddenly against the phantom wind. Suddenly she was aware of other people in the corridor with her, and she could not turn her head to look at them, but she knew them without having to look. "Help me, please," she said, "all of you." The other people in the corridor, 3 children, 2 adults, were somehow insubstantial to touch the door, but their hands closed about hers, and as she pulled on the big iron handle, suddenly she felt strong. "Never let up, miss. Hold strong," whispered a voice in her mind. "Pull, girl, pull," whispered another. And then a voice that sounded like her mother's, her own mother, her real, wonderful, maddening, infuriating, glorious mother, just said, "Well done, Coraline," and that was enough. The door started to slope closed easily as anything. "No," screamed a voice from behind the door, and it no longer sounded even faintly human. Something snatched at Coraline, reaching through the closing gap between the door and the doorpost. Coraline jerked her head out of the way, but the door began to open once more. "We're going to go home," said Coraline. "We are. Help me." She ducked at the snatching fingers. They moved through her, then ghost hands lent her strength that she no longer possessed. There was a final moment of resistance, as if something were caught in the door, and then, with a crash, the wooden door banged closed. Something dropped from Coraline's head height to the floor. It landed with sort of a scuttling thump. "Come on," said the cat. "This is not a good place to be in." Quickly, Coraline turned her back on the door and began to run as fast as was practical through the dark corridor, running her hand along the wall to make sure she didn't bump into anything or get turned around. It was an uphill run, and it seemed to her that it went on for a longer distance than anything could possibly go. The wall she was touching suddenly felt warm and yielding now, and she realized it felt like it were covered in a fine downy fur. It moved as if it were taking a breath. She snatched her hand away from it. Winds howled in the dark. She was scared she would bump into something, and she put her hand for the wall once more. This time, what she felt was hot and wet, as if she put her hand in someone's mouth. She pulled it back with a small wail. Her eyes had adjusted to the dark. She could half see, as faintly glowing patches ahead of her, 2 adults, 3 children. She could hear the cat, too, padding in the dark in front of her. And there was something else which suddenly scuttled between her feet, nearly sending Coraline flying. She caught herself before she went down, using her own momentum to keep moving. She knew that if she fell in that corridor, she might never get up again. Whatever that corridor was older by far than the other mother. It was deep and slow, and she knew that she was there. The daylight appeared, and she ran towards it, puffing and wheezing. Almost there, she called encouragingly, but in the light she discovered that the wraiths had gone, and she was alone. She did not have time to wonder what had happened to them. Panting for breath, she staggered through the door, slammed it behind her with the loudest, most satisfying bang you can imagine. Coraline locked the door with the key and put the key back in her pocket. The black cat was huddled in the farthest corner of the room, the pink tip of its tongue showing, its eyes wide. Coraline went over to it and crouched down beside it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry I threw you at her, but it was the only way to distract her enough to get us all out. She would have never kept her word, would she?" The cat looked up at her, then rested its head on her hand, licking her fingers with a sandpapery tongue. It began to purr. "Then we're friends?" said Coraline. She sat down on one of her grandmother's uncomfortable armchairs, and the cat sprang up into her lap and made itself comfortable. The light that came through the picture window was daylight, real golden, late afternoon daylight, not a white mist daylight. The sky was robin egg blue, and Coraline could see trees, and beyond the trees, green hills, which faded into the horizon into purples and grays. The sky had never seemed so sky. The world had never seemed so world. Coraline stared at the leaves on the trees and the patterns of lights and shadow on the cracked bark of the trunk and the beech tree outside the window. She looked down at her lap at the way the rich sunlight brushed every hair on the cat's head, turning each white whisker to gold. Nothing, she thought, had ever been so interesting. And caught up in the interestingness of the world, Coraline barely noticed she had wriggled down and curled cat-like on her grandmother's uncomfortable armchair. Nor did she notice that when she fell into a deep and dreamless sleep, and we get nice picture. Let me just check in. Oh, George? I got an update here from somebody, and he says, "Any word, Lauren?" And he seems to not be seeing me streaming. But you said that I was streaming.
Yes, you were a minute ago.
But I'm not anymore?
It gets confusing because it starts repeating your last name. So let me check. I didn't want to feedback with you, so I muted mine.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Can you find what my URL is and put it in the chat?
I just went to the library website and hit live.
Okay. Well, I don't think you actually figured out what.
You're still broadcasting, by the way. Look.
All right. I'm gonna do this last chapter. Her mother shook her gently awake. "Coraline," she said, "darling, what a funny place to fall asleep, and really this room is only for the best. We looked all over the house for you." Coraline stretched and blinked. "I'm sorry," she said. "I fell asleep." "I can see that," said her mother. "And wherever did the cat come from?" "He was waiting by the front door when I came in. Shot out like a bullet as I opened it. Probably had things to do," said Coraline. Then she hugged her mother so tightly that her arms began to ache. Her mother hugged Coraline back. "Dinner in 15 minutes," said her mother. "Don't forget to wash your hands. And look at those pajama bottoms. What did you do to your poor knee?" "I tripped," said Coraline. She went into the bathroom, and she washed her hands and cleaned her bloody knee. She put ointment on her cuts and scrapes. Then she went into her bedroom, her real bedroom, her true bedroom. She pushed her hands into the pockets of her dressing gown, and she pulled out 3 marbles, a stone with a hole in it, the black key, an empty snow globe. She shook the snow globe and watched the glittery snow swirl through the water to fill the empty world. She put it down and watched the snow fall, covering the place where the little couple had once stood. Coraline took a piece of string from her toy box and strung the black key on the string. Then she knotted the string and hung it around her neck. "There," she said. She put on some clothes and hid the key under a t-shirt. It was cold against her skin. The stone went into her pocket. Coraline walked down the hallway to her father's study. He had his back to her, but she knew just on seeing him that his eyes, when he turned round, would be her father's kind gray eyes, and she crept over and kissed him on the back of his balding head. "Hello, Coraline." Then he looked around and smiled at her. "What was that for?" "Nothing," said Coraline. "I just miss you sometimes, that's all." "Oh, good," he said. He put the computer to sleep, stood up, and then, for no reason at all, he picked up Coraline, which he had not done for such a long time, not since she had started pointing out to her that she was much too old to be carried, and he carried her into the kitchen. Dinner that night was pizza, and even though it was homemade by her father, so the crust was alternatively thick and doughy and raw, or too thin and burnt, and even though he had put slices of green pepper on it, along with little meatballs and, of all things, pineapple chunks, Coraline ate the entire slice she had been given. Well, she ate everything except for the pineapple chunks. And soon enough it was bedtime. Coraline kept the key around her neck, but she put the gray marbles beneath her pillow, and in bed that night Coraline dreamt a dream. She was at a picnic under an old oak tree in a green meadow. The sun was high in the sky, and while there were distant fluffy clouds on the horizon, the sky above her head was a deep, untroubled blue. There was a white linen cloth laid on the grass, with bowls piled high with food, so she could see salads, sandwiches, nuts, fruit, jugs of lemonade, and water, and thick chocolate milk. Coraline sat on one side of the tablecloth, while three other children took a side each. They were dressed in the oddest clothes. The smallest of them, sitting on Coraline's left, was a boy with red velvet knee breeches and a frilly white shirt. His face was dirty, and he was piling his plate high with boiled new potatoes and with what looked like cold, whole cooked trout. "This is the finest of picnics, lady," he said to her. "Yes," said Coraline, "I think it is. I wonder who organized it." "Why, I think you did, miss," said a tall girl sitting opposite Coraline. She wore a brown, rather shapeless dress, and had a brown bonnet on her head which tied beneath her chin. "And we are more grateful for it than all the words can ever say." She was eating slices of bread and jam, deftly cutting the bread from a large golden brown loaf with a huge knife, then spooning on all the purple jam with a wooden spoon. She had jam all around her mouth. "Aye, this is the finest food I've eaten in centuries," said the girl on Coraline's right. She was a very pale child, dressed in what seemed to be spider webs, with a circle of glittering silver set in her blonde hair. Coraline could have sworn that the girl had two wings, like dusty silver butterfly wings, not bird wings, coming out of her back. The girl's plate was piled high with pretty flowers. She smiled at Coraline as if it had been a very long time since she had smiled, and she had almost but not quite forgotten how. Coraline found herself liking this girl immediately. And then, in the way of dreams, the picnic was gone, and they were playing in the meadow, running and shouting and tossing a glittering ball from one to another. Coraline knew it was a dream then, because none of them ever got tired or winded or out of breath. She wasn't even sweating. They were just laughing and ran in a game that was just partly tag, partly piggy in the middle, and partly just a magnificent romp. Three of them ran along the ground while the pale girl fluttered a little over their heads, swooping down on butterfly wings to grab the ball and swing it up again into the sky before she tossed the ball to one of the other children. And then, without a word about it being spoken, the game was done. The four of them went back to the picnic cloth where the lunch dishes had been cleared away. And then there were four bowls waiting for them, three of ice cream, one of honeysuckle flowers piled high. They ate with relish. "Thank you for coming to my party," said Coraline. "If it is mine." "The pleasure is ours, Coraline Jones," said the winged girl, nibbling the honeysuckle blossom. "If there were something we could do for you, to thank you and to reward you." "Aye," said the boy with the red velvet breeches and the dirty face. He put out his hand and held Coraline's hand with his own. It was warm now. "It is a very fine thing you did for us, miss," said the tall girl. She now had a smear of chocolate ice cream all around her lips. "I'm just pleased it's over." Was it her imagination, or did a shadow cross the faces of the other children at the picnic? The winged girl in the circlet The circlet in her hair, glittering like a star, rested her fingers for a moment on the back of Coraline's hand. "It is over and done for us," she said. "This is our staging post from here. We three will set out for uncharted lands, and what comes after no one alive can say." She stopped talking. "There's a but, isn't there?" said Coraline. "I can feel it, like a rain cloud." The boy on her left tried to smile bravely, but his lower lip began to tremble, and he bit it with his upper teeth and said nothing. The girl in the brown bonnet shifted uncomfortably and said, "Yes, miss." "But I got you three back," said Coraline. "I got Mom and Dad back. I shut the door, I locked it. What more was I meant to do?" The boy squeezed Coraline's hand with his. She found herself remembering when it had been she trying to reassure him, when he was little more than a cold memory in the darkness. "Well, can you give me a clue?" asked Coraline. "Isn't there something you can tell me?" "The beldam swore by her good right hand," said the tall girl, "but she lied." "My governess," said the boy, "used to say that no one is ever given more to shoulder than he or she can bear." He shrugged as he said this, as if he had not yet made his own mind up whether or not it was true. "We wish you luck," said the winged girl. "Good fortune and wisdom and courage, although you have already shown that you have all three of these blessings and in abundance." "She hates you," blurted the boy. "She hasn't lost anything for so long. Be wise, be brave, be tricky." "But it's not fair," said Coraline in her dream angrily. "It's just not fair. It should be over." The boy with the dirty face stood up and hugged Coraline tightly. "Take comfort in this," he whispered. "Thou'rt alive. Thou livest." And in her dream, Coraline saw that the sun had set and the stars were twinkling in the darkening sky. Coraline stood in the meadow and she watched as the three children, two of them walking, one flying, went away from her, across the grass, silver in the light of the huge moon. Three of them came to a small golden wooden bridge over a stream. They stopped there and waved, and Coraline waved back. And what came after was darkness. Coraline woke in the early hours of the morning, convinced she had heard something moving, but unsure what it was. She waited. Something made a rustling noise outside her bedroom door. She wondered if it was a rat. The door rattled. Coraline clambered out of bed. "Go away," said Coraline sharply. "Go away or you'll be sorry." There was a pause. Then whatever it was scuttled away down the hall. There was something odd and irregular about its footsteps. If there were footsteps, Coraline found herself wondering if it was perhaps a rat with an extra leg. "It isn't over, is it?" she said to herself. Then she opened the bedroom door. The gray, pre dawn light showed her the whole of the corridor completely deserted. She went towards the front door, sparing a hasty glance back at the wardrobe door mirror hanging on the wall at the other end of the hallway, seeing nothing but her own pale face staring back at her, looking sleepy and serious. Gentle, reassuring snores came from her parents' room, but the door was closed. All the doors off the corridor were closed. Whatever the scuttling thing was, it had to be here somewhere. Coraline opened the front door and looked at the gray sky. She wondered how long it would be until the sun came up, wondered whether her dream had been a true thing, well knowing in her heart that it had been. Something she had taken to be part of the shadows under the hall couch detached itself from beneath the couch and made a mad scrambling rush on its long white legs heading for the front door. Coraline's mouth dropped open in horror, and she stepped out of the way as the thing clicked and scuttled past her, and out of the house, running crab-like on its too many tapping, clicking, scurrying feet. She knew what it was, and she knew what it was after. She had seen it too many times in the last few days, reaching and clutching and snatching and popping black beetles obediently into the other mother's mouth, 5-footed, crimson nailed, the color of bone. It was the other mother's right hand. It wanted the black key. Let me see if I can. Yeah, creepy. Coraline's parents never seem to remember anything about their time in the snow globe. At least they never said anything about it, and Coraline never mentioned it to them. Sometimes she wondered whether they had ever noticed that they had lost 2 days in the real world, and they came to the eventual conclusion that they had not. Then again, that there are some people who keep track of every day and every hour, and there are some people who don't. And Coraline's parents were solidly in the second camp. Coraline had placed the marbles beneath her pillow before she went to sleep that first night in her home in her room once more, and she went back to bed after she saw the other mother's hand. Although there was not much time left for sleeping, um, she rested her head back on that pillow. Something scrunched gently as she did. She sat up and lifted the pillow. The fragments of the glass marbles that she saw looked like the remnants of eggshells one finds beneath trees in the springtime, like empty, broken robin's eggs, or even more delicate, wren's eggs perhaps. Whatever had been inside the glass spheres had gone. Coraline thought of the three children waving goodbye to her in the moonlight, waving before they crossed that silver stream. She gathered up the eggshell thin fragments with care and placed them in a small blue box which had once held a bracelet that her grandmother had given her when she was a little girl. The bracelet was long lost, but the box remained. Miss Spink and Miss Forcible came back from visiting Miss Spink's niece, and Coraline went down to their flat for tea. It was a Monday. On Wednesday, Coraline would go back to school. A whole new school year would begin. Miss Forcible insisted on reading Coraline's tea leaves. Well, everything looks mostly shipshape and Bristol fashion, lovey, said Miss Forcible. Sorry, said Coraline. Everything's coming up roses, said Miss Forcible. Well, almost everything. I'm not sure what that is. She pointed to a clump of tea leaves sticking to the side of the cup. Miss Spink tutted and reached for the cup. Honestly, Miriam, give it here. Let me see. She blinked through her thick spectacles. Oh dear, no, I have no idea what that signifies. It almost looks like a hand. Coraline looked. The clump of leaves did look like a hand reaching for something. Hamish, the Scotty dog, was hiding under Miss Forcible's chair, and he wouldn't come out. I think he was in some sort of fight, said Miss Spink. He has a deep gash on his side, poor dear. We'll take him to the vet later this afternoon. I knew I wish I knew what could have done it. Something Coraline knew would have to be done. That final week of the holidays, the weather was magnificent, as if the summer itself were trying to make up for the miserable weather they had been having, by giving them some bright, glorious days before it ended. The crazy old man upstairs called down to Coraline when he saw her coming out of Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's flat. Hey, hi, you, Caroline! He shouted over the railing. It's Coraline, she said. How are the mice? Something has frightened them, said the old man, scratching his mustache. I think maybe there's a weasel in my house. Something is about. I heard it in the night. In my country, we would have put down a trap for it. Maybe put down a little meat or hamburger, and when the creature comes to feast, then bam, it'd be caught and never bother us more. The mice are so scared they will not even pick up their little musical instruments. I don't think it wants meat, said Coraline. She put her hand up and touched the black key that hung around her neck, and then she went back inside. She bathed herself and kept the key around her neck the entire time she was in the bath. She never took it off anymore. Something scratched at her bedroom window after she went to bed. Coraline was almost asleep, but she slipped out of bed and pulled open the curtains. A white hand with crimson fingernails leapt from the window ledge onto a drain pipe and was immediately out of sight. There were deep gouges in the glass on the other side of the window. Coraline slept uneasily that night, waking from time to time to plot and ponder, then falling back into sleep, never quite certain where her pondering ended and the dream began, one ear always open for the sound of something scratching at her window pane, or at her bedroom door. In the morning, Coraline said to her mother, "I'm going to have a picnic with my dolls today. Can I borrow a sheet, an old one you don't need any longer, as a tablecloth?" "I don't think we have one of those," said her mother. She opened the kitchen drawer that held the napkins and the tablecloths, and she prodded about in it. "Hold on. Will this do?" It was a folded up disposable paper tablecloth covered in red flowers, left over from some picnic they had had several years before. "That's perfect," said Coraline. "I didn't think you played with your dolls anymore," said Mrs. Jones. "I don't," admitted Coraline. They're protective coloration. Hmm. "Well, we'll be back in time for lunch," said her mother. "Have a good time." Coraline filled a cardboard box with dolls and several plastic dolls' teacups. She filled a jug with water and she went outside. She walked down the road just as if she were going to the shops. Before she reached the supermarket. She cut across a fence into some wasteland and across an old drive. Then she crawled under a hedge. She had to go under the hedge in two journeys in order to not spill the water from the jug. It was a long, roundabout, looping journey, but at the end of it, Coraline was satisfied that she had not been followed. She came out behind the dilapidated old tennis court. She crossed over it to the meadow where the long grass swayed. She found the planks on the edge of the meadow. They were astonishingly heavy and almost too heavy for a girl to lift, even using all her strength, but she managed. She didn't have any choice. She pulled the planks out of the way one by one, grunting and sweating with all the effort, revealing a deep, round, brick lined hole in the ground. It smelled of damp and dark. The bricks were greenish and slippery. She spread out the tablecloth and laid it carefully over the top of the well. She put a plastic doll's cup in every foot or so. At the edge of the well, she weighed each cup down with water from the jug. She put a doll in the grass beside each cup, making it look very much like a doll's tea party. Then she retraced her steps back under the hedge along the dusty yellow drive, around the back of the shops, and then back to her house. She reached up and took the key from around her neck. She dangled it from the string as if the key were just something she liked to play with. Then she knocked on the door of Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's flat. Miss Spink opened the door. "Hello, dear," she said. "I don't want to come in," said Coraline. "I just wanted to find out how Hamish was doing." Miss Spink sighed. "The vet said Hamish is a brave little soldier. Luckily, the cut doesn't seem to be infected. We cannot imagine what could have done it. The vet says some animal, he thinks, but he has no idea what. Mr. Bobo says that he thinks it might have been a weasel." "Mr. Bobo?" "The man in the top flat. Mr. Bobo. Fine old circus family, I believe. Romanian or Slovenian or Livanian or one of those countries. Bless me, I can never remember them any more." It had never occurred to Coraline that the crazy old man upstairs actually had a name, she realized. If she'd known his name was Mr. Bobo, she would have said it every chance she got. How often do you get to say a name like Mr. Bobo out loud? "Oh," said Coraline to Miss Pink, "Mr. Bobo, right. Well," she said a little louder, "I'm going to go play with my dolls now. Over by the old tennis court, round back." "That's nice, dear," said Miss Pink. Then she added confidently, "Make sure you keep an eye out for the old well. Mr. Lovett, who was here before your time, said that he thought it might go down for a half mile or more." Coraline hoped that the hand had not heard this last, and she changed the subject. "This key," said Coraline loudly. "Oh, it's just some old key from our house. It's part of my game. That's why I'm carrying it around with me on this piece of string." "Well, goodbye now." "What an extraordinary child," said Miss Spink to herself as she closed the door. Coraline ambled across the meadow towards the old tennis court, dangling and swinging the black key on its piece of string as she walked. Several times she thought she saw something the color of bone in the undergrowth. It was keeping pace with her about 30 feet away. She tried to whistle, but nothing happened, so she sang out loud instead a song her father had made up for her when she was a little baby, and which had always made her laugh. It went, "Oh, my twitchy witchy girl, I think you are so nice. I give you bowls of porridge, and I give you bowls of rice. Cream. I give you lots of kisses, I give you lots of hugs, but I never give you sandwiches with bugs in." That was what she sang as she sauntered through the woods, and her voice hardly trembled at all. The dolls' tea party was where she left it. She was relieved it was not a windy day, for everything was still in place. Every water filled plastic cup weighed down the paper tablecloth as it was meant to. She breathed a sigh of relief. Now was the hardest part. "Hello, dolls," she said brightly. "It's tea time." She walked close to the paper tablecloth. "I brought the lucky key," she told the dolls, "to make sure we have a good picnic." And then, as carefully as she could, she leaned over and gently placed the key on the tablecloth. She was still holding it on the string. She held her breath, hoping that the cups of water at the edges of the well would weigh the cloth down, letting it take the weight of the key without collapsing into the well. The key sat in the middle of the paper cloth. Coraline let go of the string and took a step back. Now it was all up to the hand. She turned to the dolls. "Who would like a piece of cherry cake?" she asked. "Jemima? Pinky? Primrose?" And she served each doll a slice of invisible cake on an invisible plate, chattering happily as she did so. From the corner of her eye, she saw something bone white scamper from one tree trunk to another, closer and closer. She forced herself not to look at it. "Jemima," said Coraline, "what a bad girl you are. You've dropped your cake. Now I have to go over and get you a whole new slice." And she walked around the tea party until she was on the other side of it to get the to she, until she was on the other side of it to the hand. She pretended to clean up spilled cake and get Jemima another piece. And then, in a skittering, chittering rush, it came. The hand, running high on its fingertips, scrabbled through the tall grass and up onto the tree stump. It stood there for a moment like a crab tasting the air, and then it made one triumphant nail clacking leap onto the center of the paper tablecloth. Time slowed for Coraline. The white fingers closed around the black key. And then the weight of the momentum of the hand sent the plastic doll's cups flying, and the paper tablecloth, and the key, and all the others, and the other mother's right hand went tumbling down into the darkness of the well. Coraline counted slowly under her breath. She got to 40 before she heard a muffled splash coming from a long way below. Someone had once told her if you look up at the sky from the bottom of a mine shaft, even in the brightest daylight, you'll see a night sky and stars. Coraline wondered if the hand could see stars from where it was. She hauled the heavy planks back onto the well, covering it as carefully as she could. She didn't want anything to get in. She didn't want anything to ever get out. She put the dolls and cups back into the cardboard box she had carried them out in. Something caught her eye while she was doing this, and she straightened up in time to see the black cat stalking towards her, its tail held high and curling at the tip like a question mark. It was the first time she had seen the cat in several days since they had returned together from the other mother's place. The cat walked over to her and jumped up onto the planks that covered the well. Then slowly it winked one eye at her. It sprang down into the long grass in front of her and rolled over onto its back, wiggling about ecstatically. Coraline scratched and tickled the soft fur on its belly, and the cat purred contentedly. When it had enough, it rolled over onto its front once more and walked back towards the tennis court, like a tiny patch of midnight in the midday sun. Coraline went back to the house. Mr. Bobo was waiting for her in the driveway. He clapped her on the shoulder. "The mice tell me that all is good," he said. "They say that you are our savior, Caroline." "It's Coraline, Mr. Bobo," said Coraline. "Not Caroline, Coraline." "Coraline," said Mr. Bobo, repeating her name to himself with wonderment and respect. Very good, Coraline. The mice say that I must tell you that as soon as they are ready to perform in public, you will come and watch them as the first audience of all. They will play Tumpty, Umpty, and Toodle Oodle, and they will dance and do 1,000 tricks, and that is what they say. I would like that very much, said Coraline, when they're ready. She knocked at Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's door. Miss Spink let her in, and Coraline went into the parlor. She put her box of dolls down on the floor. She put her hand into her pocket and pulled out she pulled out the stone with the hole in it. Here's my stone with the hole in it. Here you go, she said. I don't need it anymore. I'm very grateful. I think it may have saved my life and saved some other people's death. She gave them both tight hugs, although her arms barely stretched around Miss Spink, and Miss Forcible smelled like raw garlic. Then Coraline picked up her box of dolls and went out. What an extraordinary child, said Miss Spink. No one had hugged her like that since she had retired from the theater. That night, Coraline lay in bed, all bathed, teeth cleaned, with her eyes open, staring up at the ceiling. It was warm enough that now that the hand was gone, she had opened her bedroom windows wide. She had insisted to her father that the curtains not be entirely closed. Her new school clothes were laid out carefully on her chair for her to put on when she woke. Normally, on the night before her first day of the term, Coraline was apprehensive and nervous, but she realized there was nothing left about school that could scare her anymore. She fancied she could hear sweet music on the night air, and the kind of music that could only be played on the tiniest of silver trombones and trumpets and bassoons and piccolos and tubas, so delicate and small that their keys could only be pressed by the tiny pink fingers of white mice. Coraline imagined that she was back again in her dream with the two girls and boy under the oak tree in the meadow, and she smiled. As the first stars came out, Coraline finally allowed herself to drift into sleep while the gentle upstairs music of the mouse circus spilled out onto the warm evening air, telling the world that the summer was almost done. There's our little mouse circus. And that's the end. We don't actually know. I don't know if she hears the mouse circus or not, but that's the end. We got the 10th anniversary edition. We have a couple discussion questions at the end, but that's the end at the end. And I'm gonna hold on to this just in case there's any evil stuff around. I'm gonna make sure that I, peer through it. But yeah, I'm gonna mute myself and see if anybody is actually watching. See if there's any discussion happening.